As I stepped into my cousin's house, a heavy silence enveloped us. The air felt thick with grief, each room echoing with the absence of my uncle. My aunt sat in the living room, her eyes red and puffy, staring blankly at the wall as if trying to grasp the reality of our loss. The once vibrant space was now a shadow of its former self, filled only with memories that hung like specters in the corners. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach as I glanced at the family photos lining the walls, smiling faces that reminded us of the joy we once shared. Now, they served as painful reminders of our recent tragedy. The laughter we used to share had been replaced by whispers and subdued conversations, as if we were all afraid to break the fragile silence that had settled over us like a heavy fog. Everywhere I looked, I could see how deeply my uncle's passing affected everyone. My cousins wandered about, their faces drawn and somber, and I realized we were all bound by a shared sense of sorrow. The loss was palpable, weighing down on us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this darkness would linger long after we left. As the evening wore on, my cousin's laughter broke through the oppressive atmosphere, a stark contrast to the somber mood surrounding us. In a moment of levity, he challenged me to enter the room where my uncle had passed away. My heart raced at the thought. The mere mention of that room sent chills down my spine, conjuring images of darkness and despair. I remembered the stories my aunt had told us about his last moments, how the life had slowly faded from his eyes, leaving nothing but emptiness behind. "Come on, it'll be fun," my cousin urged, a mischievous glint in his eye. He led me to the door, which loomed large and ominous at the end of the hallway. I could feel my pulse quicken as I approached, the air thick with an unsettling energy. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit space where shadows danced along the walls, and I caught sight of the old rocking chair sitting quietly in front of the window. It was a relic of my uncle's presence, the very spot where he used to spend countless hours lost in thought. For a moment, I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back. The heaviness in the room felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in around me. But my cousin's taunts echoed in my ears, egging me on. "What are you afraid of? It's just a chair. It's not like he's going to jump out at you." With a deep breath, I steeled myself and stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind me with an eerie finality. As I crossed the threshold, an unsettling chill ran down my spine. The shadows seemed to shift, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I approached the rocking chair, forcing myself to maintain an air of calm despite the palpable fear tightening in my chest. I sat down, the old wood creaking beneath me, and tried to convince myself it was just a chair. Yet, the weight of the room felt overwhelming, and I could swear I could feel my uncle's presence lingering in the air, watching me with unseen eyes. As I settled into the rocking chair, its old wood felt both familiar and foreign beneath me. I tried to steady my breathing, convincing myself that this was just a silly game. But the room seemed to pulse with a heavy energy that made it difficult to think clearly. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if it were saturated with my uncle's memories, the laughter, the stories, and the undeniable sadness of his absence. The chair creaked softly with each slight movement, echoing like a whisper of the past, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was alive somehow, as if it were cradling the essence of him. The dim light filtered through the dusty window, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I caught glimpses of familiar objects, a dusty lamp, a forgotten book, and his favorite mug sitting on the dresser. Each item seemed to hold a piece of his spirit, a fragment of the man who had filled this room with life. I felt a chill in the air, and the room grew quieter, amplifying the thumping of my heart as I sat there, still and apprehensive. The weight of the silence pressed down on me, and I couldn't help but glance around the room, half expecting to see my uncle's figure materialize from the shadows. My skin prickled with anxiety as I swayed gently back and forth in the chair, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But the memories felt like shadows lurking just beyond my vision, threatening to emerge at any moment. I could almost hear his voice, warm and comforting, yet it felt painfully out of reach, lost to the void of his absence. Despite my efforts to appear calm, a sense of foreboding enveloped me. The air felt charged, electric, and I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. My cousin's laughter echoed faintly from the other room, a distant reminder of normalcy that felt worlds away. I was alone in this space, surrounded by memories, and suddenly, the challenge didn't seem so harmless anymore. Just as I began to gather my thoughts, a sudden burst of movement from behind me shattered the silence. My cousin leaped from the shadows, a playful grin plastered across his face as he yelled, "Boo!" The sheer shock of his presence sent my heart racing, and before I could control my reaction, a terrified scream escaped my lips. I jumped out of the rocking chair, the world spinning for a brief moment as I struggled to regain my balance. The rush of adrenaline coursed through me, leaving me breathless and trembling. In the chaos of my startled reaction, I barely registered the sound of something clattering to the floor. It wasn't until I turned to see what had happened that I caught sight of it. A small, familiar box of staples that had once belonged to my uncle. The quesinha had been flung across the room, the lid thrown open as if it had been hurled with a violent force. Staples lay scattered across the floor, glinting ominously in the dim light, like tiny metallic teeth ready to pierce through the heavy atmosphere of dread. My heart sank as I stood frozen, staring at the remnants of that box. It felt impossible that it could have been knocked over by anything other than a malevolent force. The thought sent a chill down my spine. How could something so small create such a massive disturbance? It was a reminder of the life that once filled this room, but now it seemed to echo with something darker, something that shouldn't be disturbed. In that moment, the laughter from my cousin faded into the background, replaced by a suffocating silence. I felt a deep sense of foreboding wash over me, as if the air itself was warning us to leave. Without exchanging a word, panic surged through both of us. We rushed to the door, the shadows closing in around us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in that room anymore. We locked the door behind us, hearts pounding, knowing we had crossed a line we could never uncross. As soon as we locked the door behind us, a rush of adrenaline propelled us down the hallway. My cousin and I exchanged terrified glances, our breaths coming in quick, panicked bursts. The laughter that had filled the house just moments ago felt like a distant memory, replaced by the heavy weight of dread that clung to us. We stumbled into the living room, desperate to distance ourselves from that cursed space, but the lingering image of the rocking chair haunted my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had awakened in that room, something we were never meant to disturb. Once we settled in the safety of the living room, I tried to process what had just happened. The air felt thick with unspoken fears, and my mind raced with questions. Had we truly experienced something supernatural? Or had my cousin's prank unleashed a torrent of emotions tied to the recent loss of my uncle? Regardless, it was undeniable that the room now held a sinister presence, a mark left by the memory of my uncle that seemed to echo with sorrow and anger. The idea that he could still linger in that space, bound to the rocking chair and the memories it held, filled me with an unease that settled deep within my bones. As the night wore on, I found it impossible to shake the sense of foreboding that surrounded me. Each creak of the house seemed amplified, every shadow appeared more pronounced, and the darkness felt alive. I couldn't help but think of what could still be hidden in those shadows, the remnants of a life lost, and perhaps the remnants of something darker. That night, the fear we felt in my uncle's room transformed into a lasting impression, a constant reminder that some places hold onto their memories, harboring emotions that can never truly be laid to rest.